We're back around. Pull up a chair, grab a seat around the table. Joined once again by my wonderful co-host, fantastic co-host around this redraft roundtable here, Grant. And Grant, it's been a busy few days this week for both NFL and fantasy football. A lot going on this week with fantasy
Yeah,
here,
yeah. You really think it's almost like the trade deadline happened today. Like you
right?
really think like it was that much action happened, and yeah, I mean a lot of busy stuff happened the last few days that have big fantasy implications for the rest of the season.
Yeah, you'd almost think it's the NBA, because in the
Yeah,
NFL, we
yeah.
don't see, this many big caliber names getting traded, you know, mid-season. Like you said, trade deadline, it's may as well be trade deadline, but we're not even at trade deadline yet. So few things that we could see. But yeah, let's get into it. First one that came out, probably one of the most impactful ones, was Devonte Adams. He is now
hmm
not suffering from a hamstring injury in
hmm
Vegas. I think the most interesting part of his trade. We'll get to the impacts here, but the most interesting part I saw on X, formerly known as Twitter, somebody posted the most interesting part about that trade is now apparently his house that has a Taco Bell in it in Vegas is for sale. So if you find that, let somebody know.
I mean, everybody loves a good Taco Bell in their house, right? So
Right?
maybe no Taco Bell will help him do a little better with the Jets. Yeah, no,
Maybe.
I mean that's definitely the big trade of the last few days. And the real football trade terms, right, are that the Jets are giving the Raiders a fourth round pick that can be conditionally turned into a second round pick.
Yep.
I need to look at all those details to confirm how that happens exactly, but in a nutshell, I think Devonte Adams was ready to cut ties with the Raiders. Obviously, was talking with Rodgers behind the scenes, and then shows up today on the Pat McAfee show and says, "Hey, look at me, I'm here," and like kind of peeks into his little interview that Aaron's having with McAfee, and yeah, that's how the world knows.
Yeah, I think the biggest part about the contract that I read was the Jets had to pay Adams salary. So
Mm.
the
Yeah.
Raiders were not going to pay that. So that had to be consumed by the Jets. So, of course,
Mm.
from a real football dollar sense, that limits the landing spots of teams, fantasy players. We would love it. Hey, can Devontae go to the Chiefs? They need wide receiver. Let's pair him up with one of the best QBs. From a real football sense, though, that doesn't ever really make sense. That's not going to happen because it's a divisional rival. It's a
hmm
team that they could move money around. Sure, obviously they could probably move money
Yep.
around, but it's probably not going to happen where the Chiefs have
Mm.
not been that organization to go out and draft or trade for wide receivers. So the Jets, of course, like you said, Adams pairs back up with his buddy Rogers. They've had that connection since Green Bay. Then they lost it when Adams left, and then Rogers went to the Jets. So they are reunited. But how does this affect? I mean, we'll get to Amari Cooper here. There's a few other news stories we'll get to, but
Mm.
how does this kind of affect the Jets? Whether it's a real football, fantasy, just kind of first initial thoughts. I think we were texting about some of it earlier,
Mm.
and I think you had some good thoughts on first reactions to that trade of Adams to the Jets.
Yeah, so I think the initial knee jerk reaction is that I think this limits Garrett Wilson's ceiling,
Mm-hmm.
but it helps stabilize his floor because having additional weapon allows corners like Sertan and others and just overall defensive schemes to kind of free up from Garrett Wilson and focus on other receivers. Where I think this really hurts the most, and this guy was a sneaky play in a lot of leagues, sneaky pickup, is Alan Lazard,
Oh
who is
yeah.
also a Rodgers target. And Lazard was quietly receiver 8 on the year in half point PPR leagues, which is
Yep.
crazy. So a top 10 receiver that is a receiver 2 on a team that had a lot of hype around it this year. So now the problem is Devonte Adams is I think going to assume Alan Lazard's role, get that like 5 to 6 to 7 targets, probably the first couple games. But I really see us hurting Lazard's value, and I think a lot of people were probably trying to leverage him into a trade of some kind this week or maybe even next week, depending upon how his stuff went.
Yep.
And now his trade, I mean, his value has gone way down with Rodgers, assuming that receiver 2 or 1A, 1B spot with
Right.
Garrett Wilson.
Well, and Lazard's not even the Jets put out there that Mike Williams was on the trade block. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
so Lazard, I think to your point, I'd agree from a real football sense, he moves down to that wide receiver 3 role for the Jets offense where you have
Mm-hmm.
Adams and Wilson kind of commanding that 1 and 2. I have to look. I think Garrett Wilson has played some slot before, so maybe he does that again. Maybe they're kind of rotating them around. Yeah, we just saw the Jets offense without head coach Robert Saleh, and Nate Hackett wasn't. He wasn't, the one calling shots for offense. So it was kind of that new look Jets offense. But I think from a 1 game sample size, we're going to get another wrinkle thrown in. But I think from this trade, you kind of hit on it a little bit where it's going to run through Adams, it's going to run through Wilson, it's going to run through Brees Hall. That's the offense
Mm-hmm.
right there, all 3
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah,
So,
I agree with you, and I think that another thing I want to bring up too is that I think Rodgers is going to force feed Adams a lot of balls. Maybe
mm-hmm.
that might not even be good balls, but he's going to say, "Hey, like I need you to run a post, or I need you to just do this, whatever this is, right? You're not going to know the plays, but just run this," and then he's going to go do it. Um, what I'm interested in seeing is actually how this affects Brees Hall's volume, because I
Yeah.
think it could be the same as Garrett Wilson, where it's like it limits those ceiling games, right? But with the floor, because the offense is theoretically, you add an elite receiver to your team,
Mm-hmm.
theoretically, right? From a fantasy perspective, the ceiling of all of those other players go down slightly, but the floor increases because the offense should move better, which means more yards, which means more first downs, more touchdowns, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? The
Well,
offense is on the field more because that receiver is making plays.
yeah.
So what I'm wondering with Brees is like, okay, Brees will be on the field more. He's consuming a large amount of snaps. Like we might not see the ceiling games as much, right? But he'll be on the. But I think his floor is going to go up. So I think of these couple of these low games he's had, these 6, 7, 8 point games that he's had recently in a couple weeks, I think those are going to probably go away because I think he'll be out on the field more.
Right.
And even if Rodgers is thrown from behind and in really struggling, you're going to have Devonte Adams who can get them back in that and get a first down and then hand off to Brees on first or second down.
Plus, it may also, for both Wilson and Hall, while the ceiling of targets, because we just saw Wilson have a 22 target game 2 weeks
Yeah.
ago against the Vikings in London. And then he was a first read last on Monday night, so just a few nights ago. But I think you're right, where the top end of targets for both Wilson and Hall go down. I think
Mm-hmm.
the quality of targets and the space in which they're able to operate kind of increases a little bit, as well as
Yeah.
the amount of time, how much time they're on offense, all of that stuff. I think all that increases. So you could balance it out where, yeah, we're not going to get the high ceiling games, but we're going to get consistent production from them. And
Yeah.
yeah, so, and for somebody like Wilson, he may now not have other cornerbacks that are matched up against the wide receiver 1. That may shift over to Adams, where now that's a plus matchup for Garrett Wilson, where it may have been a negative matchup for him in previous weeks. So, yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. I think if you have Hall or Wilson or even Adams now, those are all holds
Mm-hmm.
in fantasy. Because I think we need to know what this is going to be. There's obviously, if you have Wilson, it's you're typically probably one of those who you drafted him either as a wide receiver one, or you got him as your wide receiver two if you went wide receiver heavy. So you're probably holding, hoping that he produces that wide receiver two numbers. So if he is your wide receiver one, it's selling for 85 cents on the dollar type of a deal if you end up trading him.
Hmm.
Because it's not going to be that,
Yeah.
he's not going to be that wide receiver top 10 that he could be. But he still has definite value there, I think.
Yeah, and like you've obviously held him at this point for an owner of Adams. You've held him through these
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote hamstring injuries. You've held them through all their issues. So to me, like his value is as low as it's going to go right now. And with a new quarterback that's functional, it's not whoever the Raiders are going to trot out there,
Right.
right? And Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew. You have a running back that is great. You have overall a balanced defense. I mean, I think the Jets are been unlucky on a
Sure.
couple of different games. So to me, like I think they're better than their record shows, and that I think if you a Lazard owner is where I'm kind of concerned because
Yep.
that's where it's like you held this guy. He's a great waiver, probably a great flex play. Hopefully that you're sticking in at the number 8 overall receiver. And I mean, maybe you get one more week out of Lazard if you're desperate and you've got bye weeks coming up where it's like, hey, Adam's still learning the playbook. He's going to get up to speed. Like he got traded on what is this today, Wednesday or Tuesday,
Mm-hmm.
whenever the trade broke. And then he's got 3 days to, get to New York and get settled in, all this stuff. Like maybe that's a situation where if you're a Lazard owner, you've got one viable week, right? But I mean, I think if you're a Lazard owner, you kind of have to you can try to sell, I guess, high, but no one's going to take it if they're paying attention, right? So you're kind of stuck with him, I think.
Yeah. To me, he's probably a drop.
Yeah,
Because it's a tough matchup this week against Pittsburgh. Um,
yeah.
and after that,
But like, do
it's
you think that if you hold him, if you're a Lazard owner, you hold him anyway just to see like he receiver 8? Like, do you wait? Do you hold him and say, all right, I've got 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever your bench spot situation is. If I have the resources, if I don't immediately need to like put someone off the waivers, do you hold them for 2 or 3 weeks and see what happens, right? Or because if he's still giving you like 7 to 10 points a game, are you like, hey, I'm going to flex this guy like perpetually?
yeah. I think if you have the bench spot and you don't need to drop somebody, you don't need to try to fill fill that spot because hopefully he was at worst your wide receiver 3 or your flex already.
Yep,
So yeah,
yep,
I think you're right. Where if you have the spot, you have the space, and you're okay with, hey, let's see if he still gets me that 7 to 10 point production. Maybe it's a, 3 catches, 50 yards with the potential of a touchdown.
mm-hmm.
Knowing that that's a pretty limited upside. I think yes, you probably do hold him. Because I will say so they are the Jets they are 2-4, right?
Yes,
But they had a pretty difficult schedule and Sunday's going to be another test, so uh I'd be scared to play almost any Jet, but I also know it's
yeah,
maybe not as difficult. The Steelers aren't maybe as difficult as we might think they are. Um, anyway, I can see that game being like a classic drag in the mud 17-14 game because that's the
yeah,
way both teams kind
yeah.
of want to play. But after that, it kind of eases up, and then I think you're kind of looking at a lot of good matchups where you get the Patriots again, the Texans, where that's a probably a shootout more than anything else because the Texans they have a good defense but not great defense. But that's Cardinals, Colts, Seahawks, Dolphins, Jags, Rams. Then you get Bills, Dolphins again, where that offense could
Mm,
be humming, and so especially if you
yeah,
have Rodgers, that's the big winner fantasy wise, in my opinion, is Rodgers who has two alpha wide receivers plus a really good run game. Let's go. I also it's probably Tyler Conklin probably is also a big hit off of this, even though He's been kind of that streamer tight end. Um, that may come to an end with this, where again, if the
Mm,
offense does run through Adams, Wilson, and Hall, that may be the, you know, I could also say, oh, Conklin also same as Breeze, same as Lazard has
yeah,
the option of, hey, the field's opening up for him, so it kind of opens up the offense a little bit. So
yeah, yeah. I agree, and it's one of those classic chicken egg situations in
right,
fantasy, right? Where it's like, all right, we're adding an elite receiver, so therefore the offense should be on the field more. But then what happens to the rest of the offense? Does that extra time equate to more targets for like a Conklin, or does he go away completely? Right. So that's kind of like the catch 22 of like adding, especially off season trades or even any kind of trades in general, right? You're adding
yep,
more firepower to an offense. Like, how does it shake out? How does usage shake out? And everything.
yeah. I think the key, and we've talked about stats. What are stats kind of look at? And we've done that. We've kind of reviewed that a little bit. I think the key over the next like 2 weeks, look at target shares, look at the percentages,
Mm,
and then compare that with what was there before. That's going to kind of give, I think, the biggest indicator of, are they running the same amount of routes? Are they getting targeted at the same rate? Or how much does that go down?
yep.
That's probably the big
Yeah.
key with all of the trades. I don't know.
Yeah. And also too for everyone who's like trying to keep track of what's going on, like I think ideally, right, if you are a Devontae, a Garrett Wilson, or an Aaron Rodgers owner, right? Ideally, you want this offense to function like the Bucks offense functions right now.
Yeah.
You want this 1A, 1B receiver with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. That's ideally what happens right now.
Yep.
Of course, there's a version of that where, Garrett Wilson falls off the cliff, or Devontae Adams takes 3 weeks to get used to the offense and all these things. But like in your mind, like that's what you're doing. Where that's the goal, right? So when someone you're just keep that in mind when you're looking at selling these players or buying them. Like what the expectations are, what everybody hopes they're going to be, is something similar to the Bucks offense. But reality is,
Right.
it's going to take a few weeks to get used to that.
And in a few weeks, the matchups are going to be there for it to look like that. So I
Yeah,
think
exactly. Yeah.
I think you're going to start seeing a boom. Um, I think you said it very well, where the ceilings just aren't there, but it's really, really safe
Mhm.
floors. It's really safe floors.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, kind of moving off that a little bit. Uh, before we get the other trade that happened, since we did bring up the matchup with the Steelers, news came out. Russell Wilson, he's taking first team reps. Is this news? Of course, we don't know the future. We aren't in talks with anybody on the
Mhm.
team. We're reading the same blurbs from reporters that everybody else is. But is this news, or is this
Mm.
the Steelers playing head games with the Jets, so they don't know who to scheme for as far as real football goes come Sunday?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of scheming. I don't. I think Justin Fields has played great, and the Steelers are their record because of how well he has taken care of the ball. It's not been
Mm-hmm.
flashy. It's not been a Josh Allen 400-yard passing game, but he's taking care of the ball well. And I don't really see the Steelers do anything. Like, obviously, when you have two quarterbacks that have started like that in the past, if you're Tomlin, it's probably a good idea to give first team reps to one, like to like both of
Yeah.
them, right? Like at some point you have to split it. So I don't know how much of that is behind. We're reading that behind the scenes of Wilson's going to come back. Like Wilson's going to, be that guy. Like I don't know, but I think that what we need to look at is just overall like the who's he comfortable with. It's been Justin Fields,
Mm-hmm.
right? Justin Fields has overall been that guy. He has led them to the record. He's kept them safe, right? He's
Yeah.
played the brand of football that Mike Tomlin wants. And right now they're 4-2, I think, right? So
Yep.
that's a great record. and I don't think that changes. I think it'd be really stupid to. I say stupid. I think unwise. I'm not a football coach, right? But I think at this point, like, if you're a fantasy owner, it's like, yeah, I think the value of your receivers probably go up a bit with Wilson, but I don't think you can really, like, again, but if you draft like a George Pickens or something, like, I mean, you kind of know what his value's been the whole season. So I don't think you're expecting something to happen where Russell Wilson comes in and starts throwing 400 yards a game, like a Sam Darnold situation.
But I don't see if they switch to Russell Wilson, I don't see that the offense changes that much more.
Yeah.
I think you have more short passes, more close to the line of scrimmage. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it looks slightly different where I do agree with you. I think it's a bit of head games going on between Steelers and the Jets saying, yeah, which one are we starting? You're not going to know. To your point, I don't think Justin Fields has done anything to lose this job.
Mm-hmm.
He has not done something to lose them multiple games. They are, like you said, they're 4-2. They are tied with the Ravens for the lead in the North. So it's a matter of they are trying to win. I do think
Yeah.
Russell Wilson has had a great career, but for
Mm-hmm.
this time in his playing career, Justin Fields gives you
Yeah.
better opportunity to win, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I agree with you. And I think that going into the season, I think Russell Wilson was the starter. That was the plan
Yep.
based upon how Justin Fields had performed at Chicago, right? So, but same we've seen this with Sam Darnold, we've seen this with Baker Mayfield, we've seen this with a lot of QBs this season who've like had this resurgence with the new team. Is that I overall think that Tomlin was expecting Justin Fields to do as well as he was doing. I think if Fields was doing better, then I think Russell Wilson comes back, and a lot of these like injury reports that we got on Sunday mornings of like, oh, Wilson's calf is tightened and he's not going to play, those would probably have gone away. And if I had to have guessed, I think like week 4 or 5, Wilson would have played if Fields was playing poorly, and the Steelers were like
Right.
1-4, right? And then but I think because they've been playing well, they haven't been in a rush to get back because Tomlin's probably told both of them like, hey, even if he's probably been honest with Russell and like, hey, even if you're healthy, Justin's playing well enough. Like I'm gonna go with him because I don't want to disrupt the offense. I want to make sure he's confident. All of this stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I agree with you. Is like I don't really think I personally think the offense gets a little bit better, like from a fantasy perspective with Russell Wilson. I think with the
Sure.
receivers, but I think the overall. But I agree with you. I think the overall the team itself doesn't change that much, right? But fantasy wise, I think yeah, probably a little. It's a little. You see a little more points on receivers like Pickens and others but overall, yeah, it's going to be about the same.
Yeah. The only caveat I'll say is you mentioned it, and so I'll bring it up of Wilson was named to start in the offseason. Mike Tomlin has
Yeah.
also come out, and this is coach speak, so we have to take all of that with a grain of salt, but Tomlin has come out in the past saying a quarterback under his regime will not lose his job due to injury. So technically, Wilson lost the job to an injury. So this could be Tomlin saying, look, I'm not going to lose it to injury, but I think if he does make the switch to Wilson, it's a short leash knowing Fields can run this offense, and he has. So it's a pretty short leash to say, don't mess up.
I mean, being 4-2 and tied for the division lead was something the Steelers probably weren't planning to be at. So to me, again, there's a lot of factors that I'm not aware of because I'm not getting paid $5-10 million a year as a football coach, right? But to me, you're kind of playing with fire, honestly, to like swap your quarterbacks now.
Yep.
Because what if Wilson comes in and has an okay game? Then it's like, okay, you'll go back to Fields. So then your backup is kind of shot, like his confidence is shot, and Fields is like, well, now I have to get back to how I'm playing, and then maybe he goes back to reverse back to how he was playing in Chicago, and then all of a sudden you're like, now you're in real trouble. So
yeah, no, it's it is playing with fire. If you start doing that, it's playing with fire.
Yep. Yep.
For a fantasy perspective, what I would say is if you're a quarterback needy team and Wilson is on the waiver wire, if you want to speculate, go pick him up. I don't think he's going to provide the same ceiling as Fields, because Fields' ceiling has that rushing component that Wilson does not have at this stage in his career. So I don't think you're going to be able to say apples to apples. If I had Fields, I'm going to get the same amount from Wilson. But if you're holding Fields, and I am in some leagues, I'm not dropping. I'm going to wait because I'm not buying that he's just going to get replaced. Not yet, anyway.
No, no, and if he is like you mentioned before, Wilson got a bad game. He get put in like he's dual threat quarterback. You gotta hold him.
Yeah, you gotta hold him. Just be patient and hold him. He's been a good, serviceable, if nothing else, QB2 with QB1 upside, and he's done well with that role. So, yeah, just wanted to touch on that as it's interesting news coming out.
Yeah.
All right, we had another trade. There were several trades. But we had another trade come in, and the lowly Browns have shipped off Amari Cooper to the Bills. I think this was for a 3rd round pick and a 6th and 7th pick swap. That the Bills are giving a 3rd round and swapping their 6th round for the Jets' 7th round pick. So, Buffalo is obviously, unlike the Jets, Buffalo is still leading the division for the East. They're 4-2 as well. And they were doing decent. Now I did see a stat the other day that I think it was Monday. The 4 wins have come against teams that all have losing records for Buffalo. The 2 losses have come against teams that have winning records and then would be considered playoff teams. So the Ravens and trying to think who else. The Ravens and it was the Texans.
Oh, the Texans, yeah.
No. The Texans. So this obviously makes the Bills a little bit better. They lost Stephon Diggs in the offseason last year. They let him go. And this obviously changes the dynamic a little bit. Josh Allen, from a fantasy quarterback, already been playing well. From a real quarterback as well, been playing well. But this changes the offense in they're not relying on Mac Hollins. Curtis Samuel can be that gadget player still, but I think the 2 impact players, potentially both positive, but in a weird sort of way, Khalil Shakir and Dalton Kincaid from a passive perspective.
Yeah, I think so. What are your thoughts on the Bills' offense? Right, obviously, we've seen what Josh Allen can do these first 6 weeks. Right, it's been crazy. He's been able to dice most teams up. There's been a couple of exceptions recently, but in general, he's diced a lot of people up. But the distribution has been similar to the Chiefs of the last couple years, where it's there hasn't been this go-to receiver one, and in typically if you have the number 1 overall quarterback in fantasy, it would make sense that you have a couple receivers that are number 1, number 3, number 5 in fantasy rankings. And that doesn't happen with the Bills. Last year, obviously, Stephon Diggs was there, and now he's not. But this year, it's been spread out. So what I'm kind of wondering is, again, you mentioned Shakir, Keon Coleman, the rookie, Dalton Kincaid. How does that affect them? Because the Bills are moving their offense just fine, right? There's no problems with them moving the offense. What I'm wondering though is okay, you add an Amari Cooper who is a good receiver. Is he as good as his late Dallas days? And he went to the Browns, and obviously the Browns have done Cleveland things, and they have Deshaun Watson as quarterback, and that obviously limits a lot of stuff. But what I'm wondering is like adding Amari Cooper. It's a great weapon to have for the Bills, but like fantasy wise, does that really help or hurt most of these players, right? And I don't know if it really affects them much because it's another weapon, but because Josh Allen moves the ball around so much, like you're taking off a random touchdown from someone and moving on to Amari Cooper or a couple
Right.
of handful of receptions here or there. Like it's almost like of I don't know, like the Chiefs right now. Like if someone adds a high caliber receiver to the Chiefs, like okay, like obviously they've been banged up, but like even what does that do? Like it doesn't really affect the move the needle much because they're all utilized in different ways.
Yeah, I think the biggest one that probably affects negatively is rookie Keon Coleman. Now,
Mm-hmm.
you weren't probably, hopefully, you weren't using him as I need to have him as a starter because he was having very up and down. Um, I don't think he's ready. And this is personal opinion, but just from watching, I don't think he's ready to be that number one wide receiver. Um,
Yeah.
I think they wanted him to be. I don't think he's ready for that. Personally, I think the two players it does help more is Kincaid and Shakir. And I say that because Shakir runs mostly out of the slot. He's more that slot wide receiver route runner. So that helps having an actual true number one wide receiver that can run routes,
Mm.
get open like Cooper does. That helps Shakir work in space. I also think so. The stories that we were saying, or the narrative that we were saying with Buffalo in the offseason was, well, this is going to run through Kincaid. He is going to be Travis Kelsey Jr. He is going to be, running those routes, doing that. I don't know that Kincaid is that tight end, though. So
Mm.
it, again, in the same way it helps Shakir, it helps Kincaid more, where operate in space, you don't it's not the I think the target volume potentially lowers, but the types of targets, the quality of targets increases because
Mm.
you add in the ability. It's already good offense, it's not going to stop moving, but you add in more quality targets to what you're getting.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a good point. Because I look at it and it's a little bit of a head scratcher for me. Like, man, if I have these players for Buffalo, like for the Jets, there's way more movement to consider, right? Because they're yes, the offense is decent, but it's not like the Bills level, right? So I think with the Bills, when you add like a quality receiver like that, it takes a little more wrinkling and like massaging to
Yeah.
understand like, okay, how this can affect everything. Kincaid, I think, is kind of coming into a little bit of a groove, right? And we call
Mhm.
that a groove because we're in tight end desperation fantasy land over here with
With all of them.
4 to 6 points a game is great, right, from a
Yeah.
tight end at this point in the season. So, yeah, I mean, if Kincaid goes from his 3 catches for 45 yards type of deal to maybe it's like 4 or 5 catches for like 70 because it just kind of gives a little more space, great.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, again, it's one of those things too, like how effective will he be? They've got a bye in a few weeks, so like is he going to come up to speed? How long is he going to play? Kind of stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think like now is the time if you can. Obviously the trade value has gone up for Cooper.
Yeah.
I think
Oh yeah,
his
for sure.
Oh yeah, but I think his ceiling though is still wide receiver two. I don't think he's a
Hmm.
wide receiver one, and I think it's because points you hit on was the offense. It doesn't need to run strictly through him. Wide receiver ones can be utilized just to be able to open up space for the offense, and that may be part of it.
Yep.
And I think part of what we're forgetting, the Bills are more run heavy. They were at the late part of last season when they made the offensive coordinator change, and they've continued that this season. So it's not like they're going to continue just let's throw the ball 60 times a game. I don't think they want to do that.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
think because they're also very run heavy, it obviously helps. Having a good wide receiver one helps, but it's then again, it's the limit of targets, but where are those targets going? And I think the quality then just brings it up where Shakir still stays as a potential wide receiver 3, flex option. Cooper's a wide receiver 2. Um, but once James Cook comes back, or if he doesn't, Ray Davis, which we saw on Monday night, they're both very viable options in the run game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that obviously the Texans were not. I mean, that was a great game that came down to the wire, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like Josh Allen, like has had a couple of okay games recently. I think he bounces back from those. But yeah, I think what you mentioned is spot on. Like I don't think the Bills. I don't think that Sean McDermott wants to have Josh Allen throw the ball 45 times, right? Like
Right.
he's probably looking for a Josh Allen is 25 out of 30 for 300 yards type of deal, maybe ideally, right? And then like
Right.
you've got 100 and some odd change on the ground for a balanced game. So yeah, I agree. I think Amari Cooper. I agree with what you said. I think wide receiver 2 value. Now I think that you have to start him, as soon as possible, at least in your flex spot or something, because I think that just having that elite fantasy option and Josh Allen throwing the ball to him is worth it.
Right.
Even if he gets 1 or 2 catches, they could be 40, 30, 40-yard catches.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's not the best matchup, but not the worst matchup with the Titans this week, where the Titans are
Mm-hmm.
they're good defense, but they haven't put everything together. So could be a little bit of a struggle, but at the same time, could not be. So you never know.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. Where I don't think it can get worse than Amari Cooper getting peppered with targets that he can't catch from Deshaun Watson. So can't get
Yep.
worse than that.
100%.
So
100% agree.
well, those are like the big trades that happened, and like I said earlier, it felt like this is the NBA where we don't see these big name
Mm-hmm.
receivers, just get traded. One that kind of went under the radar. I don't know if it has really much fantasy impact. Cam Akers went from the Texans to the Vikings, so reunited back with the Vikings. He was there last season. Um, Aaron Jones, I
Mm-hmm.
think, is supposed to come back from his injury after the bye week. So,
Mm-hmm.
any thoughts from that potential trade
Yeah,
that
I
we
think
did?
that could have just been. It could just be insurance, right? Like
Sure.
maybe Aaron Jones has some kind of lingering issue. We don't really know the full extent of it after the bye week, right? Because they don't really tell us much. But I think we can probably look at a bunch of different stuff, and we can. I mean, I think they looked at a bunch of different stuff. Sorry, and they said, "Hey, we bring in a guy back who's familiar with the system.
Yep.
Like, it's a good back. He's going to be a solid backup in case something happens."
Mm-hmm.
I don't really think that Jones's value really goes down. I think it's more of like it's more of a handcuff situation. I think that's the reason they're not going to immediately bring him back if they can help it. But yeah, I mean it depends. Like maybe it's running back by committee with Jones and Akers. I don't know, but it could be like a Montgomery um, Jones situation from a couple years ago, right? Where it's like at Green Bay, right? Where it's like Jones
Yeah.
does first and second downs and the occasional third, and Montgomery comes in and does third down work and things like that, which is what Green Bay did a lot. It could be like that. We don't know.
Could be. Yeah. And also, like you said, just should be it's insurance. Running backs get injured, and Jones has a history of being injured for multiple weeks at a time. So it could be
Yeah.
a Ty Chandler, uh, Cam Akers, you guys are splitting the work here while Jones is getting healthy if he actually does
Yeah.
go down. So yeah, I don't think it moves the needle much. I think if I have Aaron Jones, I'm excited to see him back, and hoping that he is not injured, because he's been, along with the rest of the Vikings, doing absolutely fantastic in that offense. And of course, off to a 5-0 start. Minnesota is looking at, hey, we can actually make moves here where they were written off at
Mhm.
the beginning of the season. So
Yeah. Yeah. And then all on these trades, we've talked about how it affects the team they're going to. What about the teams that are leaving real quick? So what
ah,
about the Raiders? The Raiders with Devontae Adams. Like I mean, obviously the entire Raiders offense takes a big hit
yep.
because Like, are there really any viable? Are there any viable options for the Raiders other than maybe Mattinson, who's a running back three? Like, is there really any other value right now for Raiders fantasy wise?
I would say Brock Bowers still remains as that top five
Oh yeah, I forgot. That's
tight
obvious. Yeah,
end. So you're just making sure I remembered him. But yeah, Bowers,
yeah.
top five. I think an interesting one. It's one I'm not super excited, but Jacoby Myers, um, he's more of a flex play, but he has then that wide receiver two upside where not having Adams, and he's been injured the last couple of games. So um, he'd be one if you're in need of a flex or and your wide receiver needy. Um, Definitely keep him on the radar. Trey Tucker, I want to see it. I'm not really super excited, but he would be that second option. But I think after Bowers, after Myers, or maybe Madison, if to add some running back depth, I'm holding. I'm
Mhm.
not really interested in O'Connell. I'm not interested really in Gardner Minshew if
Yeah.
he actually takes it back over. So that's kind of where I'm looking there. Um, with Cleveland,
Do you
uh,
think? Do you
yeah, go
think
for it.
Bauer's value real fast? Do you think Bauer's value goes? I say maybe not value. His output goes up or down or stays the same with Adams gone.
It either stays the same or it goes up. And
Yeah.
because I think if it goes up, I think he is getting more first read targets. Um, but I could also see then the scenario saying, well, who else are they throwing it to? It goes down. But typically teams don't scheme their best cornerbacks to cover a tight end. So yeah, I
Right.
could see it
Yeah.
either being up or staying the same. So
Got it.
yeah. How about Cleveland? Are we excited about anybody on
Hmm.
Cleveland right now?
I think the only thing you're really excited about is the return of the king. When I say the king, I mean Mr. Nick Chubb.
Oh
There
yeah.
is there is news that he potentially comes back. He logged a full practice today. There
Ooh.
is rumblings that he will start in full on Sunday, especially with Jerome Ford being out and injured. So I don't know Ford's status right now, but he didn't play last week, right? And so I think they're I think Nick Chubb is a crazy athlete. I wish that he had some better pieces around him to kind of
Yep.
help keep all the stress off of him, which we saw right with Brees and other running backs, right? Over in the past that they just don't have a lot of options; they just key in on them.
Yeah.
So I think for me that's the only viable part of the Cleveland offense I'm really looking at is Nick Chubb, who's just like an otherworldly running back, and he's 13 months removed from this massive knee surgery, so that's a concern is like how he does after that. But that's probably the only viable piece of the Cleveland offense I'm holding on to, and everything else I don't other than maybe like streaming a defense or a kicker here or there, I don't really see a lot of like positional player value with Cleveland's offense right now.
The only other one I'll say is tight end David Njoku. And
Mm.
and that's only if I don't have any other options.
Yeah, yeah.
More because he hasn't produced because he was injured for like 3 weeks. And I think he had in a PPR, he had like 8 or 9 points last week. So in the tight end wasteland, it's okay, well, Amari Cooper's gone. Are the targets going to go to Jerry Judy? Are they going to go to David Njoku? Or are they going to go to nobody? Because that's also, I think, an option with Cleveland is they could just go to nobody. Um,
Yeah.
so
I think
I
how
would
with how
say, yeah,
bad Deshaun Watson's playing and ownership's like decision that like we absolutely must play him because we have guaranteed money. We've got sunk costs in him,
yeah,
right? Then I think that's kind of the big problem that I'm having is like I think if they moved off of him, it would be fine. It'd be better.
Yeah.
But they're
Yeah.
not doing that. And so you got, okay, Deshaun Watson's averaging, 13, 14, 17 receptions a game total. Well, you start splitting that out to everybody. Okay, running backs get a couple. Joku gets 2 or 3. Amari Cooper had 3 or 4. Well, there's just not enough distribution, all right? And now with Amari Cooper gone, like I just feel like that it's the Browns' offense is going to get bad, and I'm hoping that Nick Chubb
Yeah.
kind of gives it some of it back. But then I'm afraid they're just going to key on Chubb because there's no viable receiver options for Deshaun Watson to throw to.
Yeah. How bad of a job is the Cleveland head coaching job? And I will say Kevin Stefanski has done a marvelous job of going up to the podium, saying exactly what ownership wants him to say, even though I, for the life of me, cannot believe him when he says that Watson gives them the best chance to win week in and week out.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I think even having like a running back out of a wildcat formation is better. And it's really unfortunate because 5 years ago with the Texans, I mean, Deshaun Watson was one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and he was what we hoped Justin Fields or all these other these dual threat quarterbacks would have been, right? Which was like not just running, but they can throw the ball. And yeah, I mean, obviously we all know what's happened since then with all the off the field issues that he's had and everything else. But I think between that and the contract, it's really, I don't know if it's either he doesn't care. I can't tell if he honestly doesn't care, or like he's in his own head at this point and he can't get out of it, or he's just fallen off a cliff. Like, I don't know. I'm not really sure. So, but regardless of how it works out, he's not startable in fantasy. I mean, I think you're really desperate to even start him in a super flex league at this point.
Oh, yeah. I think you're better to hold Justin Fields if you have the opportunity than even with the looming Russell Wilson potentially taking over. I think Justin Fields has more value going forward, even if he loses his job for a few weeks, just because that potential is there than having Watson.
Yep.
So, I mean, the key would be go pick up Jameis Winston, because it could be Jameis Winston as soon as the ownership decides, hey, we're ready. We don't want to put out a product that's so bad.
Yeah, and I think Jameis Winston instantly makes that Browns offense better. And again, I don't know all the details behind it, right? I think I don't know, we've discussed it already, but I mean, I think Jameis Winston, I mean, we've seen he's not always been the most accurate, quarterback in the league, but there's a lot of volume there, which from fantasy perspective is great. So I don't know. Again, we'll kind of see how it shakes out. Maybe we see something mid-season that's different, but yeah, it's still a mess.
No, it is. I mean, if you're the Raiders, let's go back to the Raiders a sec. And even if you're the Browns, do you just blow it up? Do you trade off all the stud pieces and say, let's start over?
Yeah, I mean the Raiders are 2-4, and they had a surprise win over the Ravens. Right, is their big surprise win that they had. So, I mean they can. I mean I think their defense is like okay. I mean you could get a lot of value from like a Max Crosby type of thing. Like I think he's a fan favorite, and trading him is probably what the Chiefs would consider trading the Travis Kelce at this point or something, where it's like it's almost unfathomable to trade. But it's one of those things where. If you're the Raiders, you have to look at like, okay, we didn't get the quarterback that we wanted in the draft. We went Brock Bowers because of just the way that the value fell, which is a great pickup. Do we try to, not really push hard for the division and playoff seeding, therefore we can get a quarterback? Or do we try to trade like Max Crosby for a quarterback or someone serviceable? Yeah, I mean, it's all legitimate things. I think being 2-4 and where you are, Broncos are also not very good, and the Chargers I think are surprising. They're like they're kind of like the Pittsburgh Steelers of the AFC West a little bit, where they're kind of like this. They've overall been efficient with a decent run game and good defensive team, So they're surprising. They've done well. So I mean,
Well,
I
they're
don't think the
three and
Raiders have a
three.
shot at a yeah, yeah. So I don't think the Raiders have a realistic shot at a playoff spot. But again, with an interim coach, I don't know if you do that to him and blow up the team, at this point and start trading away pieces already.
Well, he was the interim coach last year that he then signed to be the head coach.
Oh yeah, you're right. Sorry. Yeah,
But
was the interim coach. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
so here's another wrinkle and another, a quiet news piece, but I don't think it's that quiet. Tom Brady was allowed to be accepted as a part owner of
Mm-hmm.
the Raiders now.
Mm-hmm.
So Mark Davis now has Tom Brady in his ear as part owner of how to want to do this. And so
Mm-hmm.
it'll be interesting. I agree with what you said of, you don't want to just blow it up potentially because, Crosby is he's a well liked name both in the locker room and from the fan base, and he's part of that defense. He's an integral part of that defense.
Yeah.
So I get that, but at the same time, are you better off trying to get some value? Um, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it really it boils on the quarterback, right? The Gardner
Yep.
Minshew experiment. They took their chances. They didn't pursue a JJ McCarthy or someone else that we
Mm-hmm.
thought they'd really go after. And Brock Bowers fell to them for a good value. They got him, which has been a great pickup. But they really need a quarterback, and that really boils down to like Aiden O'Connell's not doing it. Gardner Minshew, I don't think is doing it either. Obviously, for the first few games. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're the Raiders, you're definitely trying to upgrade a quarterback. And yeah, good, great point there with Tom Brady. I mean, he's probably offering some insight and trying to give Mark Davis some information on like, hey, like here's what we should do, and who knows if that's fallen deaf ears or not.
Yeah. Do they potentially offer like and this could be interesting. Do they just let it ride for the season, but maybe go after somebody like Sam Darnold next year, who's
Mm-hmm.
played well,
Yeah, I can see that. I can also see them going after like what the Steelers have, right? Of like this
right?
Justin Fields, Russell Wilson situation where it's like if Fields plays the whole year and Russell Wilson sits on this 800K veteran salary that the Steelers are paying him because the Broncos are paying his whole salary, right? Then it's like,
Right.
hey, maybe they try to grab Russell Wilson and say, "Hey, like we need to borrow someone who's like has some experience for like 2 years. We need someone for 2 years. We'll do like a 2 year, $20 million contract or something like that for Russell." Like I don't know. Like I'm just thinking out loud. Like they're probably going to try to go to a team that has like two decent quarterbacks that could be starters that could be competing over each other, and they say like, "Hey, we're just gonna take our chances and go with it."
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah,
it's it's funny because you have teams that the window is typically 2 to 3 years, and then it shuts between.
yeah,
We saw the Jaguars are sitting at 1-5, so they're potentially going to be drafting very high up. But 2, 3 years ago, they were in the playoffs and wanting to compete, and they weren't the only ones that way either. Um, so yeah, it's just these are short windows of like how do we build to compete within that 2 to 3 year window. Having the Chiefs or the Bills or the Patriots of old. I mean, the Patriots are a great example. They had that window open for the dynasty. They were there for 20 years, and now that window's
yeah.
shut, so they got rebuilt to open that back up again. So they might have the pieces with Drake May now starting, but we'll see. So okay, well, that's a lot. There's a lot of news, a lot of speculation, a lot of news, and again, we are
Yes.
not. I did not bring my psychic ability to the table today, so it is all let's wait and see. But it's fun to
Mm,
talk about.
yeah.
What
So
anything?
before we,
Yeah,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, go for it. Before we what?
No, I was gonna say, what are a couple things that you are looking at this next week,
Hmm.
real football wise, fantasy wise? What are some things that you're looking at in the NFL?
Well, I think we have a lot of fun games this week.
Mm-hmm.
Super Bowl rematch, Chiefs 49ers. Chiefs have kind of owned the 49ers for a while, but again, it's going to be when do the injuries kind of catch up to the Kansas City Chiefs? Now,
Mm-hmm.
with Mahomes as your quarterback, you always have a chance. And that defense that's playing so well, you always have a chance. So
Mm-hmm.
that's gonna be one game. I'm interested to see how that offense after that Monday night looks against a pretty decent Niners defense. So it'll be interesting. Um, looking at we talked about it, but looking at some of the trades, how are the impacts for the Bills, for the Jets, how does that work out? Can we get some if Malik Neighbors comes back? I am interested
Mm-hmm.
actually to see the Giants Eagles because the Eagles did not come out firing on all cylinders against the Browns. So I think we have a couple coaches potentially, especially in the NFC East, on the hot seat. So does Nick Sirianni, does he get on the hot seat still? Uh, Dallas is on bye, but Mike McCarthy, I would assume, is also on the hot seat after that shellacking that Detroit did on them. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I would say it's really, I mean, speaking of the Lions, it's Lions Vikings too. This is for the NFC North, which, surprise, surprise, they're the best division in football right now. The
Mm-hmm.
worst team is the Packers at 4-2.
Yeah,
So,
it's crazy.
um, what are you looking at? I mean, here's what I'm not looking forward to. I'll just say this: tomorrow night, Thursday night, Broncos Saints. Chris Olave's
Oof.
out. Rashid Shaheed's out. Derek Carr is out. I probably not watching that game. If I'm honest,
Yeah.
I'm probably not. This is the
Yeah.
time. Be a hero. Take your wife, girlfriend, whoever out on a date. Say, look, we're gonna go on a date tonight. We're just not gonna watch football.
Yeah. Yeah, this is one where you just kind of say, "Ugh, gross," and like it's a big change from a couple weeks ago, right? When
Yeah.
we had the Falcons and the Bucks with a good game. But yeah, it's gonna
Oh
be
yeah.
gross. I mean, I also don't love watching Denver because obviously they're the same division as the Chiefs. So I don't love Denver anyways, and then the Saints' offense is depleted. So yeah, I'm probably skipping tomorrow night. Probably not gonna watch it. I might watch like highlights and see
There you
like
go.
if there's any good fantasy implications. But um, yeah, I'm actually probably looking forward. Obviously, Chiefs, 49ers, of course. But
Yep.
I think my favorite game you mentioned outside of that is probably the Vikings. The
Mm,
Vikings game, Vikings Detroit. There's gonna be a lot of juice there.
yep.
I'm excited to see if the lack or the with Aiden Hutchinson being injured right for the season. Going forward, can Detroit get pressure on Darnold and get him to make some bad decisions? That's gonna be key. But
Yep.
yeah, I mean, I think if this will tell me a lot about the Vikings. They have beaten some good teams. They've beaten the 49ers. I mean, they
Yep.
definitely put the screws to a bunch of teams. But I think if they can beat Detroit, this will say a lot about their chances in the NFC and like establish themselves as like the number one seed. I think going to the playoffs or not as the favorite to get the one seed for
As
sure.
favorite. So, quick question on that. I think it's an interesting topic with the Aiden Hutchinson injury. Does that help the offense from a fantasy perspective because the defense may take a
Yeah,
step back. So they may find themselves in more shootout opportunities.
yeah. I mean, I feel like it has to, right? Because then it puts more of the burden on the offense instead of it. If obviously with game script, right? Like if the
Mm-hmm.
opposing quarterback can keep the drive alive and score more points, they're going to call more aggressive plays, right? So
Right.
if Dan Campbell's up like 14-3 or 14-7 on somebody, then it's way more conservative play calling. You would think, right, in a late game situation versus something where they're tied 21-21 or 28-21, where he knows, like, hey, my offense has scored a decent amount. I can keep driving on them and scoring. So, yeah, I mean, it definitely can affect a lot.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to, we'll see how it turns out. But Detroit has been in some games where they've scored a lot of points. Like obviously the Cowboys game, they just shellacked them, and that's I think
Yeah.
more of this Detroit doing well, but also the Lions offense just kicking butt. So It'll be interesting to see how defenses play the Lions going forward,
Mm-hmm.
and if they can, fantasy wise, like Jared Goff can keep cooking, right? So Jameson Williams, does he take a step up fantasy wise? He'll still be the wide receiver 2, probably behind
Right.
Amon Ra, but is he a little more like consistent, and not saying he's not consistent, but more of like he's getting more targets, more receptions, rather than like this 3 for 4 for like 2 touchdowns kind of thing that he's
Yep.
the line that he's been doing. Is he going to be like a 6 for 8 for 50 yards? Like what exactly is how that gonna shake out?
Yeah, and what's interesting, I think the Lions are one of the more interesting offenses, and not to go off on a tangent, but Tom Brady said a comment during the Dallas game where the Lions are one of the few offenses in the league that they can choose how they want to beat you. Do they need to have
Mm-hmm.
a strong running game? Because they can do that. Do they need to have a strong passing game? Because they could go short, they could go intermediate, or they can beat you with the long touchdown downfield. They can have the big play. So they could beat you at almost every type of scenario. I don't know of another offense that it can actually do all of that and just choose how they want to do it. I don't think there is another offense in
Yeah,
the NFL that can do that.
yeah, I agree. I think that it'll be interesting to see the next few weeks how the Lions, go forward. If they can beat the Vikings here, then it'll say a lot too about how they
Yeah,
view themselves and
sure.
what they can do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's probably a really good one. Be a really good game. Yeah, I was gonna say there's so many potential good games. Yeah, I think we're a week away from seeing if the Dolphins actually get Tua back or how that shakes out. So I don't think it's quite
Mm-hmm.
so interesting yet. So many injuries, hopeful coming back for a lot of players. So,
Yeah,
oh, the other one, Drake May. I saw he was on injury report, but if he starts again, he faces the
yeah,
Jaguars. So how does he do? Does he continue what he started? So that'll be interesting to see
yeah.
for the London game. So yeah,
Yeah, I think Drake May. A little caveat on that. I think for sure, like if you're ownership, you're excited based on what you saw. Like obviously you got destroyed, but I think that the potential's there, and I think like at this point this is a good game. The Jaguars have not been good, so I think that you're gonna help your quarterback by not giving him immediately into some negative game script. So I don't know. I think that I think he should start. I think he should start going forward at this point. Like you're really giving him some practice games for when they can reload with some new tools in the draft and compete next year.